Well, thank you guys. Welcome. I know it is a busy time of year. Everybody wants to get things, taken care of before the holiday. And I don't know if it's crazy for you like it is here, but thanks for taking time out of your morning to join in on our webinar today. So today we're going to be talking about common issues that come up with the job system and the volunteer system and some things to do to help them. The two sites are very similar, both jobs and volunteers, so that's why we kind of lumped you guys both into one today on the webinar. There are a few things that are very specific to the job site, so my volunteer people, I apologize, you'll have to sit through a few things that you're going to be going, I have no clue what they're talking about, but don't worry. Okay, so let's get started. So helping applicants and volunteers. Let's go to my first slide. Deb and I kind of brainstormed over some of the common things that come up with when it comes to helping people. And one is, kind of big one is those interest types. And sometimes that can get a little confusing on, how they're all interconnected. Interest types are also, your volunteer types for my volunteer sites. We don't call it interest types quite as much on that particular portal, but it really is. It's like what type of applicant or what type of volunteer, and then that's connected to so many different things throughout the system. So we're going to have a conversation about that. We're going to talk about those checklists. What drives the checklist? How do you make changes to a checklist? And then we're going to spend a little time on what to do when someone's having an issue with a reference and kind of walk you through some of the common things that you can look at to kind of diagnose what's going on. We're also going to have a conversation about uploading documents and the right ways and things to consider when doing so. And then we'll go briefly over, login help. We've talked about changing emails already in a couple of our previous webinars, but we'll touch on that again and updating passwords. And then at the end of the webinar, if you have questions, we can spend some time going over those. And don't hesitate to ask questions, because sometimes you might have something going on, and the other people on the webinar are experiencing that same thing, and Deb and I aren't aware, and it's a great time to have a dialogue because we might all learn something together. So don't be shy. As always, you have my permission to unmute yourself and ask questions during the presentation or ask for more clarification. I know I kind of ramble. I do have the gift of gab, so you have my permission to kind of steer me back on track. All right, so let's get started with interest types. All right, so the first thing an applicant or a volunteer has to do when they create their account, one of the very first things is they have to pick an interest type before they can complete their profile. And that interest type is really important in telling us what type of applicant or volunteer they are. They won't even really show up in applicant search or volunteer search until they've picked an interest type. They're still in that new application kind of status. And that interest type drives a lot of things, like what ends up on their checklist, and especially with the jobs system, who can see them, because we have roles in the jobs application, by supervisor that is tied to an interest type. So the interest type is kind of a big deal within the systems. And if your guys, I know, are very familiar under, the applicant profile, that interest screen, they can pick their interest types. And on the volunteer side, it looks a little more like this, where it's on that very first page. So that's the first thing they do, and that is the signal to the system of what to do with them, how we're going to treat them, based on that interest type. All right. So interest types determine what items are added to a person's checklist. So if I pick a classroom teacher, anything in the system that says this is what goes with the classroom teacher's checklist will automatically appear on that checklist. And for the job system, it also gives them the ability to apply for a job that's under that interest type. Just kind of a reminder, anybody can go to job openings and see all the jobs. but you will only see that green apply button if you've selected that interest type of that job. And, you know, if it's not marked internal, and there's a couple other things, but that's a big one, you know. So we let everybody see everything, but we don't let them apply until they told us that they want to apply for those type of jobs, so that we can make sure they are informed of what information they need to complete in order to be considered for a job like that. So does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. A big thing that happens is sites requesting help with removing interest types or adding interest types. So the way it works is applicants can add and remove an interest type at any time, except for after they apply for a job of that like interest type. And it comes down for a couple reasons that it's that way. One, there are some really specific laws about retaining data associated to hiring. And so that's one reason why we don't like to remove an interest type after someone's applied for a job, because we have to be able to pull those reports for so much time thereafter. We can still do it for you, but some things may display a little funny. But the big thing why we don't like to remove them also is if someone who is reviewing applications doesn't have that same like interest type, and you know, so if I only can see classified, an applicant goes and applies for a classified job and then asks us to remove it, that supervisor is not going to see that person's name on the list because they don't match. Kind of why we changed it so that they can't remove themselves afterwards is we also found that a lot of applicants are really smart, and they may have 3 or 4 interest types selected, and they would go and apply for jobs and then remove themselves, so they weren't required to have those additional reference forms associated with their account. So we might have someone, they'll say they're a teacher, and they also decide to apply for a classified position. So they'd go in, they'd apply for the classified position, see that they needed classified reference forms, and take that interest type off. And so they weren't really complete, so they weren't giving us all the information. So that's kind of why, in a very simplified reasoning, we don't let them remove an interest type after they've applied for a job. And the reason it doesn't work in reverse is, you know, they can't add it back, is because we've gone in and the system says if there's data they can't make changes, it doesn't realize if it's adding it even though they're there. So in those situations, contact support, and we will help you fix the interest types. If they really need it removed, we go in and change things so that they still show up on reports correctly if needed. Sometimes people, you know, apply by mistake, and so if we need to remove them from the job because it really wasn't, they applied for the wrong job, we can do that too. So that's why just contact with your support team, and we'll work with you to get that fixed. Okay, so questions about interest types? I know it's kind of boring, but the big thing about interest types is they determine what checklist an applicant or a volunteer gets. So if I pick the administrative interest type, my checklist might look like this, where it may be different. Like if I had picked classified, you probably aren't going to see that certificates show up, and then different uploads will be assigned based on the interest type. The other thing, and same with volunteer, you know, if you have more than one volunteer type, the checklist might be different. So it might look one way for a classroom volunteer, but your coach volunteers are going to have a couple additional things that a classroom volunteer wouldn't have on their checklist. And that's where those interest types are really important. Another thing it does is with the job system, you can also have things added to your checklist by what type of job you apply for. So you can have job-specific addendums. So maybe I picked classified as my interest type, I got a classified checklist, but the minute I applied for a maintenance position, I got a maintenance addendum added here. So this is a list of all the things that the district wants the user, applicant, volunteer, to complete before they can process them as a volunteer or consider them for hire on the job site. So hopefully that makes sense. So that's what the checklist is and kind of the purpose it serves. You know, as they complete things, it goes from a red X to a green check showing them that they're done. So the applicant can kind of know any time along the way where they stand with their application. Sometimes you need to, sidebar. If you want to review what things are tied to your different checklists, it's really simple. You're going to go to that System Manager tab and go to your lookup tables, and under the shared tables, the table is called checklist. And if you come in here, all of your items are going to show up in the table on the right, and you can come in here and filter by each of your interest types. And then it'll just show you what's associated with that checklist for that interest type. And this is both jobs, checklist, and volunteer. So if you have both types of portals, you can filter and see the different ones all in the same thing. So on the release site, if I filter to certificated, these are all the things that will automatically be added to a checklist when someone checks that interest type and saves it. You know, so we've got the cert requirements, education, certificates, and so on. It's in a different area you decide which things are optional and not. Like languages might be added, but it's an optional item. So that makes sense, hopefully. So if you want to check, this is where you go to see what you've got set up on your particular site. All right. Sometimes things need to be removed from someone's checklist. A good example might be someone applied for a custodial job and they were given a custodial addendum, but then they realized, no, I really don't want to be a custodian, and unless they complete that addendum, they'll never have a complete checklist. So they might contact you and say, you know, I removed my name, can you remove this addendum? So we give you that ability to do that. So when you're in applicant search or volunteer search and you find that person and you click on the pencil to open their record, you've got all these tabs along the top. If you go to my checklist, it'll look like this screen here. And to get rid of something, you just simply go and click on the trash can and it'll be gone. So be careful that you really want to get rid of it before you go deleting random things from the checklist. You also have the ability to come in here and edit a checklist item. In theory, you could mark something complete for an applicant here. You also could mark something incomplete if you wanted them to redo it, I guess, by coming in here and clicking on that pencil. This is where you go to remove something from a checklist. This is also where you could go to add something to a checklist. This is what we do when we roll your volunteers each year, and maybe you want to add a new item like update your information. This is where we would go to add those to individual checklists. And the first thing you do is at the top of the page, there's the add checklist item, and then you have to select which checklist. So if I was adding something to my classroom volunteer checklist, I could find that from the checklist, that particular checklist from the drop-down, and then pick what actual thing I was adding. So here I did a job-specific addendum. So I selected that as the checklist, and then I went through my drop-down and I found that addendum that I wanted to add. And then I leave all these other fields blank because when I add it, it'll default the date that it was added up here for me, and this will be the date that the applicant completes it. And when they complete it, this will be marked true. Does that make sense? This is how you add something. A common reason you might add something, let's say you have a new position, you have a job-specific addendum that you want to have attached to that position, but you go and post the job before the addendum's done. And so people start applying, and then you realize, oh, I forgot to attach that addendum, and I've got 3 people that have already applied. So you go fix it, it's attached. So anybody after those 3 people will automatically have it added, but you need to get it added to those first 3 people. You could come in here and do just that, and then email them and let them know that you've added an addendum to their checklist, and that they would need to go in and complete it before they could be considered for that position. So hopefully that makes sense, how you add a checklist item. Any questions? You know, if you need to raise your hand, I can unmute you, or you can use the chat feature too to send a question my way. and I will do my best to answer it. Okay, reference forms. This is a big one. And this is just job specific, so volunteer people, you can kind of tune out for just a second. Reference forms are also tied to the interest type. So we have, typically there's a different reference form for each interest type you have in your system, or in theory, not necessarily true on every site. And so the way it works, after an applicant, picks their interest type and their checklist is formed, it's going to tell them how many references are required for that particular interest type, and they're going to get this little grid. So like this applicant actually has 2 interest types selected, and we've got the requirements set pretty low because this is our test site. So as an administrative applicant, I'm required to have 1 reference, and I need 1 returned in order to mark that green. And then I also have the paraeducator, which also requires 1. So applicants go in, and if they only have 1 interest type selected, they're only going to see 1 type of reference to choose from. And they're going to go in and they're going to create that reference record. And the minute they save it, the system sends out the reference to the reference. And then it records it as, the date they sent it. After it's completed, the pencil goes away, the edit pencil, and it records a date that that reference came back. So once a reference is received, really no changes can be made to that record by the applicant or really the district at that matter. If something does need to be changed, that's when you contact us. However, an applicant can go in and create a reference that gets sent out, and up until it's received, they can make changes. They could go in and edit, the email address and resend it if they need to. They would just request this envelope. Or they could even delete a reference, or they could even change the type of application and resend the application that that person's going to fill out, the type of form. So they have some options here. And so they go in and they do change things. And then you guys get questions you get from the person trying to complete the reference. So a common reason why a reference can't complete it, the big thing is the data doesn't match. So the email address of the reference, the one that they're entering on this screen, has to be the same as the one that's recorded by the applicant. And if they don't match, you're going to get this message: the email address you entered does not match what the applicant provided. A common scenario is maybe there's a typo in the email address, but different email servers kind of know how to forward a message anyway. It gets to them. When I worked for Vancouver Public Schools originally, they had all of our email addresses set up one way. I was br.hansen@vansd, and then, 5 years into my employment there, my email address got changed to brianna.hansen@vansd. However, if someone still emailed BR Hansen, it automatically forwarded to my correct email address. So it's very possible that if I was asked to be a reference for someone that knew me in the past, they'd still think my email address was br.hansen, and they'd put that in, and then it would come to my brianna.hansen, and I would go in, I'd come to this screen, and I'm going to enter my actual email address because that's what I would think, and I'd press this button, and it wouldn't come up, and I would most likely then contact the HR of the district I'm working with and say, hey, it's not working. So you have the ability to check that. Another common one happens is the applicant will send the reference to the person's work email, and they really want to complete it with their personal email, even though it's really not associated. And so I know Deb and I fix that a lot. When that comes up, you kind of have one or two options. You can explain to the reference that, they need to use their work email, or you could just go shadow that applicant and update it to the email that the reference wants to use, or have the applicant do it too, so that they can enter those exact same, so those two email addresses match. I hope that makes sense. But that's a big one. That's one of the most common, is that they just aren't typing, or, you know, they're just not typing so the data matches. Okay, other common reference issues. Like I said, if the reference hasn't been completed, the applicant can go in and delete it if they wanted. And that does happen. They'll go in, they'll add a reference, it gets sent automatically, and then they change their mind and delete it. So then that reference comes in, logs in, it says it can't be found. So that's one. And so you can check to see if that number still exists, and I'm going to show you in detail how to do that in just a second. Not that the reference is going to contact you about this, but sometimes the applicant picks the wrong reference form, and they don't really understand that there's, you know, if they have more than one interest type, that there's maybe more than one required. And so things kind of get goofy. Or we talked a little bit about those interest types. If we remove an interest type for an applicant, all of the, if they have references tied to that original, reference interest type that we deleted, those references, they're not going to get credit for them. So we may have to fix some things on our end or change things. Another issue is, you know, they have multiple interest types selected, so they're required to add multiple reference forms for each interest type before they're complete, and applicants just don't quite understand that. So that's one reason why you may get questions about references. So you can explain to them, like, well, you've applied to be a teacher and a coach, and so you need multiple reference forms. And I always tell them, you know, because the teacher questions are very different than the coaching ones. I know some districts use our default that just kind of skips the requirement, and as long as they have one type in, it gives them credit. And if you're interested in using that, we can have a side conversation about that. Another issue that happens from time to time is the person completing the reference, even though they have the right email added and everything, the form won't open for them. And that typically happens when the reference is overseas in a country that we have blocked access to our sites for. There's actually a list put out, I don't know who puts it out, about which countries are safe overseas and which ones aren't in relation to hacking. And there are some known countries where hacking is prevalent, and we locked, or, you know, we don't grant them access to our sites because when we have in the past, the hacking attempts are so plentiful, it actually slows down our server speeds, and applicants suffer. Things do not work well. So we have ways to help you in those situations. Contact the support team, and we'll walk you through what we need to do to help those out-of-country references. Like I said, it doesn't happen that often, but that is a possibility. Another common issue that arises is a reference goes in and they think they've completed the reference form, and they press the submit button and nothing happens. That typically indicates that they skipped a required question. And it tells them, you know, but we know not everybody reads, and they got to scroll up and they got to find the right question and answer it. So that's one. And another one is, it is a live web page, and you can only have the page open so long before it times out. And I think we have it set to almost an hour these days. So an example, which has happened multiple times, is, let's say like someone, you know, a person goes, they open the reference form, they start it, like a teacher, say a teacher's giving a reference for a coworker, and then, you know, that prep period's over, they didn't finish the reference, so they get up, they go teach their next thing, you know, teach a class here and there, and they come back a couple hours. Well, by then it would have timed out, so they've lost their data and they have to start over. So I just explained to them it is a live web page, and it's a form, and it will time out eventually. So I hope that makes sense of some of these common issues. If there's things that you've been dealing with that aren't on this list, feel free to, chime in and we can talk about it. And I'll kind of show you how I go about diagnosing references. So I always check the data in the database to kind of help me figure out what's going on. So if I have an email from a reference that says I just can't get it to work, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get that applicant's user ID, which you can get from their profile page, or if you're in search, it's that number that shows up next to their name, or you can go to user accounts and the numbers showed up there, or you can go to the user's database table and find them. And then I go under the System Manager tab, I go to the database information, I choose that, and I go to the database and I find this file, applicant_references, and I open that table. And then I go in and I filter by the username, and it's going to give me a list of all the references that this particular applicant has. And so in this system, there are 2. And I can get the reference ID right here. Applicants can't see this because we took it away because they were filling out their own reference forms. Sneaky, sneaky. You can also see from here the reference type. This is associated by the interest type. So on this site, type 4 was the administrator and type 6 is the paraeducator. This is my sample from a couple slides back. If the reference has been completed, there'll be a date here. And this information goes on this screen. It's going to show email, address, and all that stuff. What I usually do once I get here is I like to export to Excel because it's a little easier for me to look at it. And I can go and look at a couple things. I can quickly check to see what email address is saved in here. And if I see the email I received from the reference is completely different, that might be a red flag to me right then and there that, they're probably entering an email address that is different than what's recorded. And I might write back and say, I see this is the email address that's on record with this reference form. Which one are you using when you're trying to complete it? And that might solve up the issue right there. But I just look through the data and I can usually paint a picture of what's going on by just coming here and looking. Another way to check data or to get that ID for your that particular applicant by not going to the tables is if you go to the applicant upload screen and you filter or search for that applicant by their last name, and if I click on the radio button reference, it's going to give me a list of all their references right here, and you'll see right there that's another place to get the ID. The one reason I don't always come here is, look, I don't see what email it was sent to. So that's why I prefer to go to the database, but I do know that a lot of you get intimidated by the database and overwhelmed. And we will be doing a webinar, I think in March, where we're going to spend a lot of time on understanding how the database works and how the different tables are connected. So put that as a side note, and if you haven't signed up for that webinar and you're interested in learning more about your database, feel free to get signed up for that. Okay. So hopefully, at least that's a way to get started in diagnosing those references. Another thing you can do is you can always check your email log to see what was sent out. A common thing that comes up that I know of, it's just happened like this week on one site, is an applicant entered 2 references for the same person, sent out both emails, and then deleted one of them. And so the reference, the reference that received the 2 emails opens one, gets the ID number, goes to the site and enters it, and nothing comes up. And they got 2 emails. They're probably not going to read both emails and check the reference number on one of the other to make sure, because they're not going to assume they're the same, they're different numbers. So I could see that it was deleted, and I could also come here and see, oh yeah, they did send them 2. Because there's 2 listed, I can actually click the pencil here and read what was sent out and see that the numbers were different. But when you come to your email log, this is under System Utilities, and so System Manager, System Utilities, and I click on the email log tab. It lists all the recorded emails. It's a little slow to filter. So I've found if you know the message ID, it's a much quicker way to filter, and for references, it's always 1. It's ID number 1. If you know here, the name would be the applicant's display name here. Sent to would be who it was sent to. So, you could search by that email address that the reference has if you needed. So you can come here and you can get the data and you can kind of see. Another way to get the email log data is to go to the database. So that's that same, you go to the System Manager, Database Information, and you want to look for this table, system underscore email log. And the table looks like this, and you have multiple options to filter this list. You also can filter by that message ID, which is 1, or if you know what the subject line of your email looks like, or if you want to look by a specific day, or if you know the email address it went to, and so on, or the employee ID or the applicant ID, applicant user ID. You could look at all of the messages that are associated with the applicant. The nice thing about here is then I could export it to Excel and look a little more further, but the email log can sometimes paint a picture of what happened as well if you're wanting to know what's going on with a particular reference. I hope that helps and answers some or gives you an idea of kind of some of the things you can do when it comes to references. And as always, you can forward stuff to us in support and we will happily figure out what went wrong or what happened as well. Okay, uploads. So both volunteers and jobs have uploads associated with, the different checklists and stuff. And sometimes an applicant just has problems and they just can't get something uploaded. And sometimes it's just easier to say, email me your document, I'll upload it for you. And so we give you 2 ways to do that. You can shadow that applicant or volunteer and go to their checklist and go to their uploads and go through the process yourself. And I know that you guys probably all know how to do that. You just have to select the document type first, browse for the document and upload it. And once it's uploaded, it'll show up down here. You also have the ability to go to, under the Management tab, go to either Applicant Uploads or it's just called Uploads in the volunteer side. And then you're going to go by that last name, find the person, and do the same thing. But the big thing I want to point out when you do it this way, anything that you upload under the Management tab will not be viewable to the applicant. And we did that on purpose because sometimes, especially in the job side, you need to attach things to an applicant's record that the applicant would not see. It's confidential to the applicant. Maybe you've got some letters, I don't know, there's things that happen. So this would be the best place to upload. And if you don't want that applicant to get a record that you've uploaded it, make sure you check that no email box first. And you could come in here and upload. You can also look and view documents from both of these screens. So if I click on the file name, that document's going to open for me, and it looks the same over on the applicant side of things. I just have to click on the file name, and it will open. And applicants can do that as well to see what they've uploaded and get a copy if they needed to basically download it again for their own practical purposes. But when it comes to uploads, sometimes it doesn't work. I've talked about, you got to make sure if you want them to see it, to put it on the right place. But sometimes an applicant's file is larger than the amount of space they have left. And on the job side, they will get a message that lets them know they're out of space, and that's why it's not uploading for them. That feature will be added to the volunteer side. It's just not there yet to give them that notice that they don't have enough space. And you can see how much space is left on both screens right here. You can see how much space is left in their uploads. And from the applicant view, it's right here. So sometimes applicants like to scan their transcripts in like high color quality, and it eats up space, and then they use up all their space. So that's a good indicator, why it's not letting them load it, the space. And then another issue is the file name really, really matters. And if you have a bad file name, it won't upload. An example would be maybe they call their file name resume dot, and it should be like, document, but they might put 2 periods in there, dot, dot. Well, that's not going to open, and that's not going to upload because the file name's bad. So just note that, because we actually had that, I don't know which site it was last week, where someone could not upload a file, and it was because their file name was bad. That dot and the extension are really important with how computers open a thing, lets them know what type of document it is, and if it's not in the right format, it gets cranky. Sometimes people upload stuff and the file name, it does get uploaded, but it's such a bad file name that you on your end can't open it. And that's a good time to contact support, because we've got little tools sometimes to fix that file name so that you can access the file. The questions about uploads. I saw that I had a comment come in about references and if it's okay. I'll quickly answer that. Someone wanted to know, where do you get the list of the message IDs that I talked about? That's if you go to the lookup table and you stay under shared tables and go to the system messages table. That's all your system messages. The ID associated with the message will be listed. So if there's a particular message you're looking to see go out, you could look in there, find that ID, and you would have that. I just know off the top of my head that references is message ID number 1, but all of the messages have a different ID number within all the systems, and that's where you get that list. So I hope that helps the person who asked that question. And that's a great question, so thank you for bringing that up. Okay. Login help. So sometimes applicants and volunteers, they just need a little help logging in. They just can't figure it out. You know, you got to enter your email and your password, so maybe they've forgotten their password. I just remind them to click that send password button, and they should get a list. I know some things that happen when people create accounts. They type their email address wrong. They're in a hurry and they don't catch it and they don't check it. So, you know, and they just can't get in. And if they're going to send passwords, it's not going to go to the right email because they originally had a typo in it. So that's where you guys can go in. I always go to that user account, you know, system messages, user accounts, and I just kind of check what they say their email address is. And I check to see if it matches or not. And, you know, if it doesn't match, then, you know, you might want to go edit it and fix it for them. And then they would be able to get their password sent to them. But that's a common one. Another common issue when it comes to logging in is maybe we go and we change a password for someone and we send them, say, okay, we changed it, here it is. Well, they'll go and they'll copy that password, but they'll copy an extra space. And rather than type the password, they'll just copy it in here. Well, if there's an extra space in it, it's not going to work because it doesn't match. Someone said that sometimes the password feature doesn't work. It depends. It should work, but sometimes the account receiving the email message blocks it. If you ever feel that it's not working, we will test it for you. What I always say is go in and send it to yourself. If you think it's not working, put in your email address and press send password, and if you get it, then you know it is working. That's one way to test it. But do know that there are certain email providers out there that block things and mark things as spam, and there are a couple that may block that password email reminder. And we can help you with that. We can diagnose. So don't hesitate to contact support, because we can tell you right away if it's working or not. And then kind of work with you to see why that particular person isn't getting it. But as a sidebar, remember, if their email address that they're requesting it gets sent to isn't the same email address that's on file, they'll never get that message because it's going to send it to the one that's here, the one that's in the system, not the one they're entering. So I don't know if that helps or not. Okay. That's not, all right, let's see. Other questions about logging in? All right. As a reminder, all users have the ability to update their personal information at any time. So that means they can change their name, they can update their email address, and so on. They forget this, so sometimes you just have to tell them, well, log in and go to your personal information tab. You know, this is the same in volunteer jobs and even professional development. It all works the same. However, On some of the job sites, if that person is marked as an employee, the district may have chose to turn off that ability. So if it's grayed out, they see it, but it's in a lighter gray, that means that one, they have the employee role, and two, your district has opted to not let them update their information. So you can always contact support and we can tell for sure what's going on. And just kind of, we've talked about email addresses, but I like to always bring this up every time I have you on the line. That email address has to be unique. It's for their system, or that's their unique identifier in the system, because we can't ask for a social security number. And sometimes this happens. An applicant has 2 accounts and they've forgotten, and they go and they try to change the email address on the second account to the same as the first account, and it just doesn't work. Or if you, as a district, go and try to change an email for someone, I always check to see if they have a second account before I do that, because it can really cause problems, because it's not going to let you, and it kind of locks you out of things. So just double check. As a district, you have 2 ways to change a user's email. One, to shadow them on whatever portal they belong to, shadow them, go to that personal information and make the change there, and press save. Or if they're an employee, and this is on the job side, you can go to employee information and find that primary email field and update it there. This is also where you could make a name change or anything like that if needed. If you need to make a name change and an email change, we always say that you do it in 2 parts. Change the name first, press save, and then change the email address and save it. And that goes back to, there is a delay when you update email addresses, because it's that unique code. It has to update every table that unique code is stored in, and there are a couple tables that are encrypted, so it takes a little longer. And if you have a busy site, it takes longer than others. It can take longer than normal. If you have a lot of people going on, a lot of traffic going on your site, that emails can take a little longer. And until that process is completed, you won't be able to shadow that user without getting an error message. However, the support team is a tool that speeds up that process. So at any time, you could ask us to say, hey, I updated an email address and I need to get in. We can run that little special tool and you will get access back immediately. I know we kind of talk about this a lot, but just remember, emails are a big deal, because that is that special, unique identifier for that individual, and you can't have 2 people using the same email account. Passwords, quick reminder on resetting passwords, that's under that system manager, system utilities, user accounts thing. You go find the person, click on the pencil, and it opens this screen where you can go in and change the password. You press this button here, change password. Screen comes up like this, and then you enter that new password and confirm it. I also like this screen because it tells me the last time they changed their password too. So it's you get that paints a little picture. And just remember that the password needs to be at least 8 characters long. And if you're changing it for someone and making it a very generic password and you want them to have to update it later, when you're done, just make sure you press this force password change. And that is, all that does is when they log in, it prompts them to update the password one more time to something more secure. Some people get confused by that, and they think if they press this button, it changes the password for them. Nope, that's just to force them to update it. It almost needs to be like, force password update rather than change or something, but that's what that button stands for. Questions. That's kind of what I wanted to go over. Just remember, interest types drive everything in your system. They decide which checklists they get, what reference forms they fill out, what they can and can't apply for. Checklists are specific to the interest types. You have the ability to go in and remove something or add something to a checklist if you need to, because sometimes there's special situations. So we have given you that ability. It's under the search tab. You find them, click on a pencil, and go to the checklist tab, and you can make the changes yourself. References are tricky, but we give you the tools to look them up and see what's going on. Just remember to use your database. I will send a copy of this PowerPoint just so you kind of have those steps. And I'm also going to send out to people the little assisting with reference documentation that's on your site that also kind of walks you through it in a little different way. And then remember emails and updating information. Are there anything that I missed that you would like to talk about, or questions about stuff that I have gone over? You know, feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat and I'll address it for you guys.
Bree, I have a question. This is Chris.
Yes.
So if I have an applicant that has 2 profiles under 2 different email addresses, and you know, typically they'll start something and then they'll forget, or they'll come back to it maybe next year and use a different email. By using that change the email function, if we change the email to match the one that they want it to be, will it link those 2, you know, whatever data's in one with the other? Does that automatically?
No, it will not. It'll give you an error because you can't have the same email address because they're 2 separate records.
Oh, okay.
Specifically that way. So that's where you could ask the support team to help you look at your data and merge if needed, or maybe we archive one because it's just so old it doesn't matter. And the reason it just doesn't automatically do that is because we have found there are spouses that share an email address. And they have gone in and created, like one will go in and create an account, and then the spouse will log in and override that other person's stuff with their information. So we can't just have it automatically merge stuff because sometimes that's not okay.
Yeah,
because they might be 2 different people and they were trying to use the same account. But typically if you tried to update the email address with that account that's already in use, it usually will let you know. But the best thing is just let us know at support, and we'll either merge the account for you or say, you know, that second account is 4 years old. Let's just archive it.
Okay, archive is kind of a good way to do it because that way it doesn't show up again unless they actually log in and do something with that email, correct?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And it just fits there. And sometimes archive is nice in some regards because maybe someone applied like 5 years ago as a classified employee and all their data is tied to that class when they were a classified employee, but maybe they went to school and now they have a teaching certificate. And on their new account, it's all certificated information. And, you know, so it's okay if you archive the old one, it's there, you have access, but really a lot of that information in that old one wouldn't necessarily apply with where they are now. So it's a judgment call. Some districts want them all to be together. That's fine too, we can do that. But if it's old data that, you know, we have to keep for legal reasons because of the different retention laws that the state kind of sets up for hiring and all that stuff, that's where archive's nice because you're meeting your legal obligations. It's there, you could access it at any time, but it's not stuck in your face, so to speak.